Okay.
So just give me a moment. Looks like I'm already recording, so there we go.
Okay. We have attendance by visual, so I guess we're all set there. And the first item is a review of the October 16th minutes. Any comments out there? Anybody? Discussion? Good, seeing none. Anybody want to make a motion?
So moved.
And okay, all in favor? Approval of the minutes of October 16th.
We have to do roll call?
Yep. Want me to run through a roll call, Dave, or do you want to do that?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Jean Marie,
Yes.
Alan,
Abstain, I wasn't at the meeting.
Corey,
Yes.
Dave,
Aye.
Judy. You're muted at the moment, Judy.
Can she just raise her hand if she's,
Yeah,
Yeah, it'd be easier for her.
oh, we got it.
Other issues.
How do you vote, Judy, on the minutes?
Yes.
All right.
You. Okay. Item number 2 is discussion related to the Haggis Parkway District zoning amendment. So we're back.
We're back. And
Yes, Jay, Aaron, or
yeah, I can kick it off. And I do know that we have Andy Sturgeon, who's representing the, so quick background, as a reminder, we talked about this in September. This is a property owner initiated zoning change for the entirety of the Haggis Parkway to incorporate drive-through restaurants as part of a mixed-use building in a planned development project. You'll recall that there's a property owner who owns property sort of near the corner of Haggis and Payne Road that this came to us through. Through some preliminary discussions back in the summer with council leadership, the town manager, there was some discussion around or thought, you know, should this be a contract zone or a zoning amendment? And at that time, the direction was towards a full zoning amendment, but obviously need to think about what that looks like. Subsequent to our prior discussion, this item has been to council for first reading. And at first reading, the council raised some concerns, comments, really around the proliferation, the potential for proliferation of drive-throughs, I should say, in the Haggis Parkway, and some other concerns that we'll talk about as well. But I think that was sort of the main element. And then they sent it along through first reading, passed it at first reading to planning board, but really asked the planning board to think about some of the issues. And so the planning board, I think, shared many of the same concerns as council at the time around the potential for proliferation. There was also issues with or thoughts around ensuring that, and we talked about this a little bit, really trying to be sure that the zoning ordinance had performance standards in place to minimize any potential for stacking to occur out into the public ways. I think we've seen that. You know, I just drove by a very popular donut shop this morning on Route 1 where, you know, cars on the northbound Route 1 were being slowed down by vehicles stacked out. So did that business meet our basic standard? Yep, probably. But we know these businesses can't, you know, they vary so widely, right? So just being sure we think about that, particularly in the Haggis Parkway. I think some of the other concerns were really around being sure that when and if these uses are allowed in the Haggis Parkway, that they really aren't not only proliferated in the Haggis Parkway district, but they're not the predominant sort of feature of a site's activity or use. And I think the concern that we heard both at council and planning board was they like the idea of sort of requiring it to be part of a mixed use building. But I think there was some concern that you could have, you know, a fast food, high turnover drive-through restaurant come in with a very itty bitty bitty other use and sort of say, well, we're a mixed use building. So it's about how do you ensure that, there's some sort of right ratio or what have you about the uses. And then I think the other thing that came up, and this was really at planning board, because obviously they really deal with sort of more of the site development, obviously, was ensuring that, lots have the adequate sizing for any standards that might be put in place. There's some pretty small lots in the Higas Parkway, particularly along Payne Road. These are mainly currently non-conforming single-family homes. They've been there for many years. They're, legally non-conforming, just to be clear, but they're sitting on lots that are a half acre to maybe upwards of an acre. And so I think there was some just wanting to be sure that we're thinking about the entirety of the Higas Parkway zone and not just necessarily looking along the Higas Parkway itself, because the zone does branch out along Payne Road a little bit. We can bring up the map a little bit later. So I'd say those are sort of the principal issues that have been raised. I've provided a memo that starts to outline some ways we can think about them, and we can certainly talk through them as we go. I will also just say that Andy Sturgeon is on as an attendee representing the property owner. So I'm happy to sort of bring him in as well, because I know that they obviously attended both first reading and planning board and heard those concerns and probably have been given some thought to the issues as well. So I guess that's sort of what I would offer for a start, and I'd look to you, Dave, for next steps here, or the board, council, committee.
Okay, I have a couple thoughts, but I think I'll wait. In terms of dealing with attendees, is there any thought in the committee? Should we let them speak ahead, or should we wait till comments at the end? Anybody have a feeling one way or another?
I'd say let him comment now.
Okay. So we'll let him raise his hand if he wants to.
I can bring him in as panelist.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, let's do that, Jamel. That's good.
Okay, 1 minute.
I guess I'll just kick it off, but what the hell? Couple thoughts, and I don't know, I'll propose a couple ideas that I had in terms of how we address it. It seems like if it's part of a mixed use building, can we set a threshold for the size of that building so that it is large enough and does not appear as if it's a standalone? It's got a minimum of 5 or 8 or 10,000 square feet, that it is composed of a larger structure, so it doesn't have that imposing standalone free fast food appearance. And then also on the stacking, raise the threat. I don't know if we have a minimum length on stacking, but to address the stacking, get a longer car length as part of the planning review to ensure. I know now with COVID, everybody's going drive-through, so I think it probably behooves us to do that as a bigger picture item with any of the future drive-throughs to address the stacking length. So a couple thoughts. Anybody else? Jean Marie?
Yeah, I know one of the things I spoke about at council is I would prefer to see not drive through in the sense that you drive up, order, sit in your car, get your stuff and leave, but have it a pickup opportunity so that people have to order in advance and potentially pay in advance, and all they're doing is driving up, picking up and going. That was one of my thoughts on avoiding stacking and whatnot. So
just if I could tease that out just a little bit. So there would be in that sort of scenario, Jean Marie, you could potentially see there being an actual drive up window rather than sort of the curbside thing that I think we're all more accustomed to, but without necessarily the ordering station, right? Normally
That's
we think if you pull up to a drive up, there's the intercom thing. So if you
Right.
sort of eliminate that,
Right.
that might get to, is that
Yes.
sort of- okay.
And in an ideal world, post-COVID world, I would, I want to see, particularly in that area, more we're looking at walkability. Let's face it. So having a little coffee shop or luncheon place or whatever you want to call it, where there's ability to sit down. So there needs to be a sit down and eat area. But I think having a pickup window as opposed to the so-called order and drive-through, order, pay, pick up, to me, would be more in keeping with what we're trying to do in that area.
Alan, did you have a comment
Yeah,
there?
I did. I had a couple of things. One, because of the area and what we're trying to do in terms of flow or corridor view, I'll call it. I would like to see us do something with signage along Higas Parkway. I don't want to see, for example, big golden arches right on the side of the road. I think I'd like to try to avoid that. Along that same theme, I think it would be good if we held tight to our design standards. Not necessarily just take what the corporation's typical design would be, and do more with our design standards down that road. And then certainly the other thing I would like to see is some kind of thought process to how far off the road the building should be set back, what the spacing should be between other potential drive-throughs along Higas Parkway, just to try to minimize so that, again, we don't have, like we do right now on Route 1 in the Oak Hill area, you've got 3 or 4 of them that are all kind of set up in a row. Now, albeit you can't get to Wendy's right off Route 1, but it is right there. Along with drive-through banks and McDonald's and Starbucks and all the other stuff. So that's not the intent that we had for Higas Parkway. So I'd like to kind of see us figure out if there's some way that we could hold onto our original plans, or at least view corridor of the original plans as we continue down this path.
Could I add to that? When we looked at this way back, we talked about having any parking to the rear of the building, and the idea of having it, order ready, that would, eliminate some of the traffic, because they're going to just come in, pick up, and go right out. So that might help. I don't know.
Judy, I guess what I'm hearing is you're maybe suggesting along the lines of what Jean Marie was mentioning, really ensuring that if there is a drive-through, that it not be sort of the fast turnover type drive-through, but rather the order ahead and pick up, sort of more COVID responsive.
Yeah, exactly. Because we had discussed that before, and when we started thinking about it before the lighting and company came in, and that might reduce the traffic, then the length of time it's on, so you don't get too much stacking anywhere.
Yeah, I generally agree with the comments so far, and I just also note that this is all really pretty consistent, and the feedback that Jay relayed is pretty consistent, I think, with what we had discussed a month or two ago, whenever that was. I mean, I think we had similar concerns, and that at least our intent was to try to provide a little guidance that would help to address that. I think Jean Marie's idea about the sort of hybrid type approach, if you will, where it's kind of a pseudo drive-through, but you're not actually queuing up waiting, is intriguing. I mean, I think there certainly would be a learning curve with that, and that would, I'm not sure how someone just driving along would necessarily know that that was how it worked, but I mean, people learn and adapt all the time, as evidenced by the last few months. So that is an interesting thought. So I don't know that I have any brilliant original ideas, but I think we knew when we discussed this the first time that it was maybe kind of threading a needle a little bit. And there are some different characteristics involved here with Higas that don't necessarily apply elsewhere.
Yes,
Jane, do you mind if we ask Andrew to, if we could ask him about the type of business that you were thinking for your project? I know that there's been lots of talk about what that is, but have they put any requirements regarding drive-throughs in your negotiations?
Would you like me to answer those questions now? I'm looking for the chair, David.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry. I lost my internet there for a second. Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Would you like me to respond, David?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I missed the question, but yeah,
Oh.
go right ahead.
It was whether you remain chair or not.
You made a co-chair, I guess.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for having me, having the opportunity to talk to you this morning. I did listen to your chatter about Scarborough in general at the beginning. Kind of makes me wish I would have selected Scarborough as the place that we moved to in southern Maine as opposed to Brunswick. But it actually was the downtown. We wanted a downtown, and that was the struggle we had with Scarborough. We actually looked at Scarborough as the first place when we moved to southern Maine. Anyway, all your suggestions make sense except for one, and so the queuing, we can make sure the queuing, that we don't care what distance you make, because we've got to make sure the queuing works for us. If a potential customer is coming down the road and the line's out to the street, they're not going to stop. They're going to go somewhere else. So we have to make sure the queuing works. And when you look at our conceptual site plan, it's way in excess of 500-600 feet maybe of queuing. So we made sure that was an option that we could include in this concept, or else we didn't figure it would be a win-win for that location. Higas Parkway has a huge setback from the road, double what I think most streets are, which keeps those signs off the edge of the road, Alan, that you're referring to, that you have to begin so far back anyway that and then you have setbacks from the roadway. So I think you'll see when you look at those particular technical requirements that a lot of your concerns are met that way. The walkability, that's a great suggestion. We do have a huge amount of apartments behind this location. Ben Devine's development, he's written a letter in support of our development, mainly because he likes the idea that they could walk to this place and get a cup of coffee or a sandwich or whatever ends up being in that building, including maybe even a restaurant. I don't know the exact, because we don't have clients yet, but this addresses the biggest issue that we got. I don't see a business model that will work where you have to order before you come. I haven't seen one. Maybe I'll be eating my words. If I do, great, but I just don't see that model working. I know a lot of people are using it today because it's the only choice they have. But I think the concerns of making sure that the queuing is there can be done technically or physically with the facility, as opposed to making sure someone has to order before they pick up. My question would be, how would you know? How would they, the visibility part of it would be null if you had to order before you picked up. And I know I'm chatting on and I see Jean's got her hand up, so maybe I should stop for a second.
Marie?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely understand where you're going, Andrew. I guess what I'm looking for is, since we have had such a sea change in people's how they're working, now with restaurants, with the order ahead and takeout. I guess where I'm looking at is rather than be an impulse buying type of place, that it be a destination type of place, so to speak. And I think the other thing that I'm thinking about, because I'm on sustainability as well as chair of ordinance, whatnot, is working with, the reduction in the use of cars idling and that sort of thing. And we're just talking about this one particular area of town. And please understand, Andrew, I'm speaking not for the council, but just myself. But I do know that there were other counselors who were like, do we really, if we're going to do it for the whole Haggis Parkway, do we want drive-through restaurants, so to speak? Or do we want them to be more, as we talked about, the mixed use destination, whatnot. So that's where I'm coming from with that. And I certainly understand what you're saying too, because the model for a lot of places like a Starbucks or whatnot does have that impulse buying with it. But remember, we also have people now, particularly younger people, who, they're very impulsive, but they're also really good at using their phones.
And I understand exactly what you're saying, Gene. I just don't, we can't take the risk at this time to build such an expensive building to hope that there is that type of client yet. 5 years from now, it might be 50% of the facilities that operate that way, and that would be great.
But this is a mixed use building. So it's not just a restaurant in there.
Right.
Or a bank or whatever. It needs to, in my opinion, needs to be mixed use.
It is.
And another
Yeah.
thing that I would like to see personally, if you're gonna have these mixed use, have them be, they have to be 2 stories, or they have to have certain elements in them, like office or living or whatever, as well as, any of the ancillary services that people in businesses or residential are used to having or would like to have.
Yeah,
But anyway, that's me. That's Jean Marie.
we can handle that. We agree with you on that. It's just, and I understand that doesn't mean the person in the next lot is gonna feel the same way too. So you obviously have to make your requirements to or additions to this existing zone or modifications, make sure that they work up and down the zone too. I know that's something Jay's said with his sample and his package about distances and distances from intersections. I didn't see anything, Jay, in your suggestions that would prohibit us from continuing. It's just, how can we make that an option?
And I just want to, so it sounds like what I'm starting to hear is Jean Marie's really talking about, because currently, as a reminder, the Haggis Parkway does permit restaurants. So restaurants are currently a permitted use. And what I think I'm hearing is sort of the tack that one tack could be to continue to allow sort of standard traditional restaurants, right? The sit-down type style restaurant, but enable them to incorporate a drive-through window that really isn't changing that sort of business model. That's what I think I'm hearing Jean Marie talk about. And really what I'm hearing the request for this zoning change is to enable a different type of model of restaurant. So I think that is, that seems to be sort of a threshold question as to what the committee's thoughts are around. Do we want to enable a different business model in the Haggis Parkway altogether? Or do we really just want to think about, has this request made us just think about tweaking the existing type of business model we allow to enable them to react to the sort of the new world we're living in? I just want to be sure we really sort of vet that out, because I'm really hearing 2 different type of business models being talked about. And so I'll stop there.
No, that's exactly where I'm coming from, Jay, is that rather than upending the whole what we're doing, is we've got restaurants, let's let them do a drive-in pickup and keep going situation.
So if I'm understanding right, the 2 business models you're referencing, one is a drive-through and the other is a curbside pickup? Is that what I'm, or is this?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is, one is, again, the traditional drive-through restaurant, right? Any restaurant with a drive-through, a Starbucks, could
Yeah.
be a Dunkin' Donuts, could be a Holy Donut,
Yeah.
Scarborough Grounds. And I guess that's part of maybe a second discussion is there's obviously different drive-throughs have different impacts. But really, I think what I'm hearing from Jean Marie, and maybe supported by Judy as well, if I heard it correctly, is we should really look at continuing, as we do now, to allow this traditional sit-down type restaurant in the Higas Parkway, but be sure we're being adaptive enough to allow that type of business where if people can't actually sit down in the restaurant because of capacity limitations, that essentially people would be ordering from home and then driving and then coming to the window and picking up more that level of service rather than having an order window, right? An order station as part of the drive-through. And so I think, really more of a casual dining, or I don't know, a seated dining establishment than a restaurant that a large portion of their business is driven by the drive-through capacity. I mean, again, I think Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or even a Holy Donut and coffee shops are largely driven by a drive-through. Scarborough Grounds, though, might be something different than a Starbucks. I honestly, not exactly sure what those numbers look like, but I certainly know what their drive-through differences look like, right? So,
I think there's a little bit of flexibility in that, I mean, the models that are out there now probably do a combination of both. I mean, I noticed there are a lot of curbside pickup stalls identified solely for that, in addition to a drive-through or to supplement a freestanding restaurant, I think. I think of the instances of like the Cowbell or, places like that don't have a drive-through, but they do have a pickup.
right. And I would say those type of things are currently allowed. They're really using their existing parking lot. And so I would say that type of curbside pickup where you pull up, you dial the number and someone walks out to you and hands you your bag of food. We wouldn't have to change anything in our existing ordinance to continue to enable that where we allow restaurants.
Judy?
Yeah, if you look at the restaurants that we currently have, most of the Asian restaurants have all of those amenities as far as the type. Some of it certainly driven by the virus, but I think was being accomplished even before it was necessitated by the virus. So people go in and they've ordered, they call it ahead, they pick it up and they leave, or people go in and they book their seat to sit down. So they have a variety, most all of them, JoJo's, Fo Hung, Happy Garden. Yeah.
And Jay, you mentioned Scarborough Grounds, and I'm always wary of relying too much on anecdote, but I certainly in my experience, and that's right there across from your office, so you see it all the time. I don't think I've ever seen that drive-through with more than 3 or 4 cars. And it's certainly, there are mornings when I drive up Route 1, Holy Donut is stacked out to Route 1. Even you go further up and the other, Starbucks will have a long backup, even the bagel place that's further up. And then meanwhile, Scarborough Grounds is just a very different intensity and nature of use. So I think it's one example, one data point, but I do think that, as has been noted before, it's an example of how more of a mixed use configuration, I think, does make a difference. I mean, I'm sure some other things that are inherent to the way that the business is set up. It's more of kind of a gathering space than some of those other places, but I think it does make a difference.
Any other thoughts here? Okay, are we trying to work our way down through your memo, I guess, in my mind, in the points that you made to try to address your questions? Are there anything else out there in terms of questions on your part that we can discuss?
Well, there's still lots to discuss. Yeah, I guess I think, and Karen chime in as well as we go, and Jamel, but I guess I'm still not sure I'm hearing a consensus, and we may not be there yet, around really what type of business model does the committee think is appropriate for restaurants in the Higas Parkway. I think Corey just now introduced a third model, but and frankly, I think that's the hardest model to wrap your hands around, because as you said, it is, Scarborough Grounds is a coffee shop. It's a locally owned coffee shop that, why isn't its drive-through jamming? I don't know. Where Holy Donut is, to me, a very, very similar model in a lot of ways, except their drive-through is jamming. And I'm not sure how you parse that difference in zoning, or even, one way I do want to, one of the concepts that came up during the planning board discussion was the ITE manual. This is the International or National Traffic Engineering book that sort of describes, there's a lot of different types of restaurants that are laid out in there, from sort of your fast food, high turnover chain restaurants, to casual dining, all the way up to fine dining. And they sort of signify different trip types. And I don't know how, I'd have to do some further exploration, if there's a way to parse different coffee shops, for example, right? That's sort of the Scarborough Grounds. That's the example we're using. How do you parse that from a Holy Donut? How do you parse that from a Dunkin' Donuts? Dunkin' Donuts, I think, is actually something that's easy to parse, because DOT actually has numbers specific for them, because they are such a different thing. Yeah, and I think, maybe the example I used in the memo was thinking about sort of the different drive-throughs between like a Dunkin' Donuts and a Panera, for example. Not all Paneras have drive-throughs, some do. I don't know. Do those sometimes back up as well? I'm not sure, but I think, that's to me the business model that does have more traditional seating. It may be sort of that casual dining, fast casual. I'm not sure what the right terminology is, but where you're going to go in, you're going to order at the counter, yet you still typically, at least my family does when we go there, sits. But I think there are examples where there are folks that do, drive through at times. So,
Jay, is one of the differences with Scarborough Grounds versus Dunkin' Donuts, or let's not take Dunkin' Donuts, Scarborough Grounds versus Holy Donut. Scarborough Grounds, the entrance to the drive-through is on the side street and not the main street. And you're going through a parking lot. I think it's not as well known that if you don't know Scarborough Grounds, you probably don't even know that they have a drive-through. Whereas Holy Donut, I think, and everybody correct me if I'm wrong, even though they're coming in off the side street, the entrance is direct and you know that there's a drive-through. So I'm just wondering if there's anything physically in the layout that distinguishes Scarborough Grounds and that is applicable to Higas Parkway.
yeah, and so go ahead, Corey.
Sorry, Jay, and Alan was on the board. I believe Alan might have been chair at the time. I can't remember exactly, but I remember when that project was approved, there was a lot of discussion about whether the planning board was going to allow Scarborough Grounds to have a drive-through. And that was, I can just say based on my memory of it, that was that design was very intentional, that we did not want it to be a primarily drive-through business or something that would encourage kind of impulse drive-through activity and queuing. And that was all part of that sort of mixed use approach, and having things sort of tucked around. And there seemed to be a strong consensus at the time that the board did not want that to be primarily a drive-through operation, and it was something that would be more kind of complementary. That's the way I remember it anyway, for whatever that's.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case, Corey.
Yeah.
That's as I recall as well. I guess here's what I'm struggling with, and maybe Jean Marie might be able to help me a little bit with this because of the council. My struggle with what we're discussing right now is that we're talking about a zoning change for Higas. If this to me lends itself, as much as I'm not the biggest fan of contract zones, this to me lends itself more to a contract zone than it does a full-blown change to Higas Parkway. So I'm kind of curious why, or it sounded to me earlier that the town council didn't want to look at this as a contract zone. And I don't know if Jean Marie might be able to help me understand that better.
Oh, yes, I can, I think. And I know Jay's got his hand up a little.
Well, I think there's just just history, because I know this was brought up at council. So Jean Marie, I'll let you sort of speak to that one. But I think just to and I referenced it early, this was a question that staff had as well, sort of like, okay, what's the best fit here? And so we actually, I ran that, as I typically do, up through the town manager, who ran it through, I believe at the time, Don and Paul as council leadership, and asked that question. And the response came back at that time about, let's think about this maybe as a more of a zoning change. Though during council discussion, this exact issue came up. And so Jean Marie, I just so there's sort of some understanding of how the applicant arrived at requesting a zoning change. Because I think really they, as I remember the conversation, Andy, what we're saying, how should we approach, they were really asking the town, how should we approach this? And so in fairness to the applicant and how this came forward, it was, at least there was some initial guidance this direction, but that's not to say further discussion doesn't merit others. But Jean Marie, if you want to talk about.
There is a certain element in the town council who's anti contract zoning or CEAs, TIFs, you name it, as you guys are probably aware. However, that being said, it was my sense by the end of our discussions that there would be some, how do I want to put this, some willingness to consider a contract zone along this, just like we do with car dealerships in town. I know that there are a couple of the counselors that I thought maybe like, oh no way, do I want to do contract zones? They were actually coming around to, well, maybe it would make sense here, because it's not that, and I would be one of them. I'm not against a drive-through per se in this particular location, but I'm not crazy about it. And I don't want to see a proliferation along the Higas Parkway because we've rezoned the whole darn thing.
That's exactly how I feel. I mean, I've got a real concern that the complete intent of Higas Parkway, the infrastructure, everything that we put in place is going to be thrown out the window if in fact we make a wholesale zoning change that says drive-throughs are okay on Higas.
Yeah. And I do think that given a little more, I hate to use the word lobbying, but that's what I do sometimes as a counselor, is lobby fellow counselors, to give some further thought about, rather than doing a wholesale change of this particular zone, why don't we allow this particular applicant, as long as they're meeting all the other, the multi-use, that there's a sit down, there's a sit down restaurant, or if it's a restaurant that wants to go in there type of thing, there's a sit down capability there. Why wouldn't we consider looking at this one place? Of course, then you get counselors who are like, well, isn't that spot zoning? So there does need to be a little more education of counselors, and we do have a new counselor coming in who doesn't have any background in municipal anything.
John Anderson.
So yeah, John Anderson. So I don't know. I would rather, I'm like Alan. I mean, I don't want to see the wholesale change the zone, but I would certainly be willing to allow the applicant. And I see Mr. Sturgeon had his hand up, so.
Yeah, you're right. At the town council, that was brought up, and I like the idea. But I do remember very clearly one counselor, I can't remember who it was, looked me right in the eye, it seemed like, as much as you could on Zoom, and said, will you meet the need? Think about it. Before you go down that road, will you meet the need? To me, that was like a warning that we're going to have a battle to meet whatever the need criteria. I'm assuming there's a need criteria in the contract zone request.
Oh, the public
Benefit.
yeah, it has to be a
So I'm
public.
scared of that. I'm scared of that requirement, to be honest with you.
And that just to be, that also came up at planning board, because I think some planning boards sort of started going down this path, and one of the planning board members actually flagged that same item. And again, public benefits, that, that's for the council at the sole discretion of the council to decide if the public benefit is there. But I think that was, I heard the same sort of cautionary flag, if you will, from both at least one counselor and one planning board member. Again, that's one
Other
member.
than that, we're on board with the contract zone. We would be happy to start that process, and I've seen it be successful, and not this exact model, but one similar to that throughout the state.
So Jay, you may remember the history more than I do, but at some point we had like Cabela's and that the other side of the of Payne Road. It was in Higas Parkway, and we put it back to B2. Anyway, what was the discussion around that? Because I think we covered some of these things during the discussion of the changes. So this was a while back.
Can you sort of restate it, Karen? I'm not sure I'm following.
So I think, they were the more commercial areas. Correct me if I'm wrong, across on the other side of Payne Road, the Cabela's Plaza.
That used to be Higas Parkway zone.
Yeah, that's B2 at that point, not Higas Parkway.
I believe that's B3 actually.
B3, okay.
Yep. So yep.
So originally, I believe that those were in Higas Parkway, and then there
Correct.
was the discussion that that's really more of a commercial area. So I just want to revisit maybe what some of that discussion was when we moved that out of Higas Parkway into the B3.
Yeah, I think it was exactly that. As I remember it, and Rick, I think, has actually, represented them, so he may speak as their representative, less a committee member on this one. But as I remember it, I think we were into our third or fourth contract zone amendment, something to that effect. And at this point, they might have wanted to do some signage that otherwise would fit exactly what they're doing in any other zone. It's what we see sort of near the Lowe's, along Scarborough Gallery, which this development certainly like. And so I think that was the discussion is, hey, we've done this contract zone, which ostensibly really just all we did was move this into a B3 zoning, or without actually just changing the zoning. So why don't we, again, this is after years, and we've done a lot of, as we talked about previously, a lot of modernization and updates to the Higas Parkway since it sat fallow for 20 years, so to speak, to try to spur some, development capacity. So I think that was really the discussion, Karen, was, why are we doing all these little nickel and dime contract zone amendments when really everything they're looking to do fits what we already have a zone in place for. And so actually, if I remember as well, it was at that time when, or sometime around then, when we made amendments to the B3 zone to actually fold in the ability to have gas stations.
Mhm.
And we said, okay, yep, in the B3 you can have gas stations. However, gas stations can only be within 1,250 feet of the Higas and Payne Road intersection. So B3 is sort of all along. Actually, I'm sorry. I need to restate that. You can have gas stations in the B3 either along Route 1 or within 1,250 feet of the Payne and Higas intersection, but not anywhere else that the B3 exists. So I think, much like the concern we're talking about here about the proliferation of the potential for drive-through restaurants in the Higas Parkway, I think that was probably the same concern around gas stations. And so it says, okay, we have gas stations, but ostensibly it's not spot zoning, but it is limiting the area within a zone to certain spots to which you can have a particular use. And so as you saw in my memo, that was at least just one of the concepts that was thrown out. Said, okay, well, if we utilize this in one location or in one zone, maybe this is a tool we could get at that would enable this type of use in a limited capacity in this zone. And I'm happy to bring up that map if that would be helpful. I know you all have it, but so anyway, I'll stop there.
Karen, I'm sorry, David, I'm jumping ahead here. I'm jumping over. Karen, are you looking at or thinking about, because it's funny, when you asked that question, my little brain was going in, does it make sense to change the zoning of that particular parcel or parcels? Now, and remind me, because I'm not looking at a map right now, that not critical care, quick care, whatever the heck it is in the golf,
Clear choice, yes.
those are all right
Right there.
part in front of that parcel, right? That Andrews has to develop. Is that Haggis?
I'm going to share my screen here.
It is. I think it's only the turnpike side of Payne Road that's the B3. So what I'm hearing us describe, if we're trying to just limit rather than going to a contract zone, does extending that B3 to this to that opposite corner, does that do the same? Does that do something similar without
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking try to think a little out of the box here.
Mhm.
And then because you do have the higher density or higher different type of usage, so to speak, along that Payne Road corridor. And then that leaves the rest of Haggis not to become fast food alleyway,
Right.
which is not our intent. But anyway.
And just a third option here in terms of some of the things that we're discussing.
If this was on Payne Road around the corner, we wouldn't be having this discussion, correct?
Right.
Right.
I
Actually,
mean,
I'm going to stop
that's-
sharing. I'm going to bring up the zoning map so we can maybe see the area even
Yeah.
a little more clearly than what that showed. So sorry, Alan, go ahead. Just
No,
let
no,
me
no,
know
I'm
what I'm up to.
just confirming what I was thinking was true.
Well, we do have two entrances too. We have one off Payne as well as the one off Haggis.
Yep. While he's doing that, I'm not, a question for Andrew. I'm not familiar enough with that piece of property, but is it conceivable that they could actually put a walkway in from the beacon at Gateway
Yes, it is.
onto that property? And is there a gully or anything that's behind that storm drainage?
But what you do is I can't remember whether there's a sidewalk from the beacon. Well, on their major exit and entrance from Payne, if there's a sidewalk along there, but you'd come to that intersection and walk right behind the ski and golf shop to this facility. Now, it's doesn't mean that they couldn't develop a trail through the woods, but I don't see that happening just because you'd want to walk at nighttime too, and I don't think you'd light that trail. I would see the path along the entranceway into the Beacon from Payne.
Yeah.
And turning right. I wouldn't want to walk along Haggis either. So Jay, if you could just show them how you go from Beacon to the site with your cursor, if you go
So
down.
this
if
is
you
the
go down.
site right here.
Right. But if you lived at Beacon, how would you get, there you go. You
So
go
there
right
is, Alan, as to your point, there is a pretty good drainage swale right through here.
Yeah. Now,
So-
I can't see
so-
your map, so,
Oh, you can't see my map?
no, I can't see it.
Oh,
Oh, I
I can
can.
see it.
I see
Yeah.
it.
Oh, huh.
Can
Everyone
anybody
else-
else see it?
I
Yeah.
see you're keeping the troublemaker out of the picture here. I get it.
Well, anyway, Alan, if you could picture if you lived at the Beacon and you just walked north towards Payne, and before you got to Payne, you turned right and went along a sidewalk behind the ski and golf shop to
Yeah,
this facility.
I got the site picture that Jay sent us in our package. So I'm
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at an overhead view of that, and it looked like there was a swale there, right?
Yeah,
behind
so
the-
there is a swale, Alan, between the proposed site and the Beacon. So as was
Yep.
suggested, what you would do is you'd presumably walk up through the ski and the golf and ski site. And then there's a roadway connection back to Beacon that has, if I remember right, I'm gonna try to zoom in, maybe give everyone a headache. I believe there's a sidewalk along that roadway, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
on the left-hand side.
Yep. So there would be, so it's not a, it's a, I would say it's a direct connection, but it's not, as the crow flies, the straightest arrow shot, but it's also not the most circuitous route I've ever seen people have to take.
Yeah.
But it is lighted, Jay. It does
Yep.
have
Yep.
sidewalk lights or street lights.
You can actually see those. Sorry, Alan, but
Yeah, no, that's okay. I don't know why I'm not seeing your screen.
and I'm going to turn the zoning on here, so we may lose the. I'm gonna try to do something.
Alan, do you have your screen above this one so that you need to minimize your screen to get back to the Zoom screen?
I didn't think so. I mean, I'm looking at, I've got dual monitors here.
Oh, okay.
So you can see, most of us can see, we have B3 on the Turnpike side of Payne Road. I'm gonna zoom out for a good stretch till we get to the Nonsuch. And then we actually have on the Route 1 side of Hygges Parkway, a B3 stretch again. So the Hygges Parkway is really sort of hemmed in, if you will, on either end of the Hygges Parkway roadway itself. The Hygges Parkway district is buttressed by B3 zoning districts, which do allow for drive-through restaurants. Folks may be familiar with. Sorry if I'm going too fast. You know, that can sometimes.
Jay, I do notice that B3 is on both sides of Route 1, but not on both sides of Payne Road.
Correct. On as you head towards the south, if you will, down Payne Road, we transition more into a residential zoning. The R2, RF are sort of suburban rural zoning types before you get all the way down to Dunstan. So really, there's sort of a commercial core here at exit 42, and then you don't pick one up again really till you get down to the Route 1 Dunstan area as you head down Payne Road. That is anyway.
So in concept, that sounds like a good idea, but it would be a little node on the B3, sticking into the Haggis zone.
Well, I think you would take both lots
Yeah,
are actually, it looks like it would be 4 lots. You take that, oh, I'm pointing to the screen and you guys can't see that. Yeah, it would be the corner lot with, where Clear Choice and all of that is, and then the 2 more lots right there. And you probably have to take, I'll leave Jay to think
yeah,
about
right.
that.
Where does it stop?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I will say, one thing I will say, and Jamel, you feel free to chime in here too, because I know you do a lot more with planning board at this point than I do. Obviously, we have the Acura contract zone. So
Right.
frankly, we'd obviously have to talk to other property owners, but whether it's Higas Parkway or B3, the contract zone is what's going to govern what they can do. This site here does have an approved site plan. They haven't started, and it is a mixed-use building. And I think they had expressed at one point some interest in trying to do a drive-through restaurant as well. Wasn't allowed in the zone, so they sort of went away from that design. But this site is approved for, basically they have a building that would sit somewhere in this location generally.
They've cleared that, I think they've cleared that lot.
I believe what you're looking at is the Acura lot that's been
Okay.
cleared. Jamel, do you know if we haven't done a pre-con or anything out here, I don't believe.
Okay, yeah,
No,
you're
this
right,
is a-
'cause
yeah.
it only went to that house. Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah, that project was approved in like late spring, early summer, and they haven't been in touch since then.
so again, I'll try to bring the zoning up so we can sort of see that again. Oh, I think maybe this is, there we go.
Yeah, so essentially, this lot is sort of pinned in by contract zones all around it. So,
Yep, that's a good point. This is a contract zone lot back here. Let me do, actually, I think I can bring up contract zones in here somewhere. Yep.
The Acura site is a contract zone agreement. I represented them on
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And of course, the property across the street, both sides of Payne Road is the Cabela's et al. Contract zone agreement. Don't know about any others.
Nope, those are the two out in this area, and you can actually, now I just turned the contract zone layer on. I guess this one doesn't have the hashing, but you can certainly see the Beacon and Cabela's are actually part of the same contract zone. And then this property is under a contract zone as well. But unfortunately, it doesn't have a hashing.
Well, to me, then that lends itself to an argument of either doing this as contract zone or would extending B3 into this lot. What's the upside downside of that? Or is this something we want to talk about more when you've had a chance to think about it?
So I think, and I don't have, I haven't done sort of the use analysis between B3 and Higas Parkway. But
Right.
from the hip, I can certainly say some of the major differences would be in the Higas Parkway, there are Higas Parkway zoning district, just to be clear, difference between the road and the district. The sort of differences that jump out at my mind are in the Higas Parkway, we say you can have retail, but retail can be no more than 20,000 square feet. Where in the B3, there's really, you can have retail, you can have big boxes, right? I don't know that this lot in particular sets up for a big box, but I'm really just talking about the differences of uses.
I can guarantee that it doesn't, Jay. because of the way-
Obviously the B3 would allow for drive-through restaurants. But at that point, then they could be standalone drive-through restaurants. It doesn't, I think what we've been talking about so far is if we're going to change the Higas Parkway zone is to require it as part of a plan development mixed use. So there's sort of, that's just one difference to think through. The Higas Parkway zone allows for incorporating some type of residential, where the B3 does not. But again, I think if we're really talking about these 4 lots, we know we have a contract zone here. we have a relatively, I would still say, new development here. It's been within 15 to 20 years, so I don't know that there'd be a great desire to tear that down and start over. We do have an approved site out here, however, nothing's happened. So yeah, I guess just that's from the hip what some of those major differences would be in terms of the context of what we've been talking about anyway.
That golf and ski, I think, went in at approximately the same time as the Cabela's, if I recall right. Because it both happened while I was on the board.
I think you're right. And they both happened, I think, right around when I started, or were just, yeah, Cabela's, I was here when Cabela's opened. I think the golf and ski may have just opened before that. So yeah, I think you're about right, Alan.
Yeah, because there was a lot of discussion about the front of that, making the back of the building look like a front of a building.
Yep.
If you remember that, Corey.
Oh, yes.
Should I continue to keep sharing, or would you like me to stop sharing? Let me know what you want to see.
It sounds to me like, and again, bear with me because I may be not hearing people correctly, but it sounds to me like we're not opposed to something going on along the lines of what Mr. Sturgeon would like to do with this lot in this area. We just don't want to see it extending down Haggis Parkway. And I feel confident in saying that that's pretty much where most of the council is coming from at this point. And that's what the council was having trouble noodling through. So again, I think what we need to be thinking about, are we setting a bad precedent? Number one, I say no, because look at what's all around this lot. But
It's all contract zone.
it's all
all around.
contract zone right there. So why not
Yep.
do contract zone here?
I'd be much more comfortable in that if it went that way.
So I think, again, just sort of reflecting on at least a comment from, and I want to be sure we're clear, one council member and only one planning board member sort of at least flagging the idea of being sure that as part of a contract zone, we need to demonstrate the public benefit.
Yeah.
If the, just want to be sure we're sort of keeping in mind all the ways we could, if really the interest is saying, okay, you know what, this location makes sense, but we really don't think other locations make sense. The potential for doing the, proximity to this intersection might be a way of getting at both issues. However, if folks think, I don't mean to talk you out of saying your recommendation being a contract zone, certainly, but I just want to be fair to the concern that was flagged through the initial discussion around contract zone, and again, only by one member of each, and what the applicant's responsibility is through that process. So, but again, the public benefit is at the sole discretion of the council. So I'm not, that's.
Yeah, I think I agree, Jay, with the 1,250-foot limit from the intersection seems like a more, I don't, not necessarily make it easier, but a streamlined way of achieving and addressing the concerns here. Whether it happens on the other, well, it looks like on the other end, it really doesn't matter because it's all B3. But the 1,250-foot diameter.
Just trying to show, I know I have that other map I provided. So essentially, even if we said, 1,000 feet brings in this property. So just to be, if you can see my little, are you still seeing my screen, I assume?
Yep.
And you can see over to the left, the measurement. So basically 1,000 feet brings you down to, I just stopped at the driveway of the sanitary pump station. And then obviously we could go out further, bring in another. Sorry. I've gone haywire. Try this again. There we go. And so what did I say? There, close enough. So I also have that.
Jay, I'd ask the question, is it easier to go contract? Or does it make more sense to go contract or just go straight B3? We would be happy.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I'm not sure which is, not sure what,
Well, if you did B3, you're locked in on all sides by a contract zone. So there can't be any more creep of B3, if you will,
Mhm.
if you just addressed this piece. Now, that doesn't address, the development that's just on the other side of the Acura dealer, but, that's a different question.
Oh, crap.
Sometimes I think partly it's an administrative issue. So is it easier to administer B3 or the 1,000 feet and
Well, I think
technique, I guess, right?
the administration from staff's perspective is really the same. It's a matter of the different use types that could then be
Mhm.
considered. And I think that would then want to be the consideration we go through. And again, I just sort of from the hip shot out what a couple of the differences are. We could do a more discrete analysis of that. And then certainly if we're going to rezone the properties, we would, need to engage the other property owners.
Mhm.
So I think, it's really, that's, again, I'm not trying to favor one over the other, but
Right.
that's sort of a restarting a different process.
Either technique gets you to the answer of, sounds like the committee is okay with a traditional drive-through at this location in the manner in which that they are proposing the site plan to be, which is.
Well, Karen, I'm just going to actually refine that a little bit. What
Okay.
I've heard so far is from this committee and others that they're okay with a drive-through at this location as part of a mixed-use building. And I would say that is different from a traditional drive-through, which the B3 would allow, which would
Okay.
potentially be a standalone drive-through restaurant, which
Yeah.
again, I'm not
Yeah.
favoring
Okay.
one over the other. I
Clarification.
just want to be sure we're clear on that difference of what
That's an
we're
excellent
talking
point.
about.
I think you open yourself up more to the comment of providing spot zoning if you go to B3 that you would not necessarily open yourself up to if you stayed with a contract zone.
Okay.
Because you can argue that there's contract zone on all sides of this piece of property.
Right, and I think.
Right, but I think Jay's technique is not going contract zone, right? Jay, you're talking about an amendment to the Higas Parkways district.
That's one approach that was talked about in the memo and tell me if you see my PDF here, what I had sent out that accompanied that. Oh, where the heck are you? So there it is. Are you guys still seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. And you're seeing the circle and the X's, or are you still seeing the zoning map?
Still zoning map.
Booger. Let's try this. Come back and try that. Are you now seeing the
Yes.
plan that I provided as part of the memo?
Yes.
Great. So what I really tried to do here was said, taking a look at how we treated gas stations in the B3, said, well, what happens? This is a technique that was used in the town previously. I sort of spurned off a concept that was raised during council meeting when council was sort of talking about the concern of proliferation. They said, well, if we're going to do this, we should at least have a separation distance, which is what the X's are, but we can talk about that later. Anyway, so if we did, I used 1,250 feet just because that was the distance we had previously used in the B3. As I said, you know, if we're really just more focused on this lot, and we said 1,000 feet, I think we would really actually just be picking up, frankly, these 4 lots we're talking about. And we'd probably start to lose some of these smaller lots along the Payne Road, which the planning board had expressed some concerns about. So we can, and so that would be one way of getting at the issue. And of course, we could always look at other, you know, I just put one down here at the Scotto Hill intersection at the other terminus of Higas Parkway, just as an example. There hasn't been any discussion down here. Don't know if that would be an interest of the community or not, the committee, but I just wanted to be sure I represented sort of different options, if you will. And then the X's are intended to indicate, basically there's 6,000 plus minus linear feet along the Higas Parkway roadway. And so the X's indicate 1,000-foot separations along the Higas Parkway zoning district. So this was intended to help folks understand what 1,000-foot separation might look like, or 2,000, or what have you, if that was a direction folks wanted to go. So I'll stop there for now.
I like the circle method, but I think the intent is the same, just a question of easing the process. But from yeah, Judy?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the papers that I got and I'm kind of confused as to what goes where, I guess. Section 8B, which is page 18, is the last, the PDF that you got, I think the next, the last one. Talking about restaurants with no drive-up, drive-through, and drive-in service. Did I miss that? Did we go by that?
So Judy, if I'm not mistaken, what you're looking at is the Higas Parkway zoning language. If I believe I'm correct, I'm going to pull it up here just to be sure I'm looking at the same thing, and I'm going to go ahead and share this.
It's section 8B,
Yeah.
Higas Parkway District HP.
Yep. So I think what you're looking at here. So this is the zoning language. The current zoning language, as you just said, spells out restaurants somewhere right in here. Yep, under number 7.
Number 7. Yeah.
Yep. So this is the current language. We currently allow restaurants either through a conventional or a plan development process, so long as they don't have drive-ups. What is being proposed is down here to say, okay, this was the original language that was brought forward, was restaurants with drive-through service in a mixed-use building only as a plan development review process. So restaurants would still be allowed, so long as they don't have a drive-through. Drive-throughs would need to be part of a mixed use and part of a plan development. So if we went with the circle method, we could incorporate this language. We would incorporate this language again, maybe with some additional thought around what mixed use means or not. But that was a question. If we went to a B3, straight B3 zoning, we would not have this type of language about it being part of a plan development in mixed use.
Yeah.
And then obviously a contract zone could have whatever parameters it needs to have based on council review.
Yeah, I just don't want to reinvent the wheel, it's like, I don't know how you keep it straight.
I have Jamel to help.
Do you? Or somebody puts you in a filing cabinet at night.
Judy, you want to try doing that as a developer with a dozen towns or 25 towns?
Yeah.
It does get tough, but it's all for a good purpose.
Well, do we have any sort of consensus here? Or, I think the intent of everybody's intent is okay, that this is the specific use in this specific lot is agreeable. It's a question of how we get there.
Yeah,
I-
and I might just, as staff, my thought would be if the committee and the interest of the community is that this concept seems to work in this location, and we like the idea of ensuring it as a mixed use development and as a plan development review, that really, I think that the sort of the Higas Parkway amendment with certain distance requirements might be the way to go, given some of the concerns raised by, again, some members of council and planning board about, can you truly demonstrate that public benefit? And maybe they can, and I don't mean to say they can't. But that's, again, that, as we've talked about in past, when we amended the contract zone process, that's stuff that's left to the sole discretion of council. So I don't, I'm not trying to figure out what their sole discretion would be. But I think, to me, the circle concept gets to the intent, and we could, but that's
So
just my
being
thoughts on it.
consistent with the circle concept was designated from the Payne Road Higas Parkway intersection.
Correct. That would be one way of doing it, yes.
And that would be,
I'm trying to,
again, going back to the earlier concern that both Jean Marie and I expressed, that would prevent it from occurring anywhere else along the Higas Parkway roadway. So I would be okay with that if we specify the intersection. And that's consistent with what we did with the gas stations.
Mhm.
I concur.
Yeah, I believe that hits it. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that,
I don't know if Judy and Rick weigh in on that. That may help provide a little more consensus.
I think it reaches what we're
I'm
looking
good with
for.
all of it.
Yeah.
I'm good with all this. I have a more general comment and it may not necessarily relate to this, but I do think that the town needs to be a little bit careful about modifications to zoning to provide, drive-throughs and drive-ups and drop-offs solely as a result of the current pandemic situation. That's not going to last forever. And while the town apparently is willing to relax certain things, zoning requirements to allow businesses to, try to operate under these circumstances, when the pandemic is over, we don't want to be left with a bunch of situations that we would not have otherwise been willing to agree to. But that's more of my general thought, and not necessarily specific to this project. And now I will get off my soapbox.
thanks, Rick.
It's
And I
a
know-
good point.
We heard you.
And I know Corey has to drop off soon. I think he's got a 9:30 somewhere else, probably on Cape Cod. He's got to magically get to. So I think what I've just heard, consensus around the idea of, okay, let's think about limiting the location within the Higas Parkway district. And that really gets at the proliferation issue, which I think I've heard as really the key or the main concern. Now, the other thing I just want to be sure we talk about, because it was the other concern that was identified, was, are we comfortable with the way the language reads about mixed-use buildings at this point? Because I think the other concern I heard at both council and planning board was, does that really mean it's going to be what we all think of as a mixed-use building, or should we put some type of percentage in there? Should we put some type of building size, I think was mentioned earlier today? So I just sort of wonder what the committee's thoughts are around that concept, and then we can talk about what those details look like.
If I can jump in, David. We would be okay as long as the limits were reasonable, but I think the limits were more focused on when we thought it could go up and down the Hagus Parkway rather than be within 1,200 feet of the intersection. So I guess the concerns that I heard from planning board and council and long range about the multi-use was worried about what it might look like up and down the road. If you get to a certain size, you're looking pretty much at our building. I don't know where else that this would apply within that 1,200. It's all already contract zone. It's only really our lot in that one lot that you say has a site plan approval but hasn't been cleared yet. So really, when you look at limiting size of the buildings or ratios, you're really looking at our conceptual project, which if it fits ours, we'd be okay with it. But I guess it's hard to say where might that change with somebody else, and how could you word that? That would be hard, but not impossible.
Right, no, I'd still want, we'd want to stick with a mixed use building, and I say yes and yes to the footprint size, and ratio of some sort, just to, who knows what could happen in the future. And that would appease the council, I would hope, to minimize the impact. I would not want to see a freestanding, the possibility of a freestanding building, freestanding drive-through anywhere. I know we're limiting it with the radius, but still.
No, I didn't mean that at all, David.
Anybody else?
Well, I guess if it's mixed use, the concern that I have is the conceptual plan that I saw is actually a building that has 2 drive-throughs. And it looks like the conceptual plan lends itself to, or the second drive-through, as I see it, is more like a bank. Is what it appears. So the one, again, when you talk about traffic and some of the other things and where those intersections are located, I would like to see the second use potentially to have a lower drive-through potential than some form of a fast food restaurant, or else we're going to get we're going to have queuing issues for the other.
We looked at that, Paul.
We need to look at that.
Yeah, the other one is a bank, and we know that, number one, you wouldn't have 2 drive-throughs on the same building either, probably, because you'd have a competition. But our concept is a bank and a drive-through.
All right.
And just so we're clear, banks with drive-throughs are currently permitted in the HP.
Yeah.
So and so I mean, one of the thoughts, Alan, that I think you just were talking about is concerns about stacking, and of course stacking. I think we're all concerned with stacking out into the public way. So that was sort of one of the other items that I'd flagged in the memo is, do we want to think about additional performance standards, at least here during this discussion about requiring there be, right now, what we say in our zoning ordinance is you need to have 6 stacking spaces at a drive-through restaurant. Well, that works well. At one example we talked about earlier today in the grounds doesn't seem to work so well at some of the other more popular coffee shops along Route 1. But what I was able to do was I sort of looked at some of the, so I did some measurements at some of the sites and really found that, if there's an additional sort of drive aisle that's off the public way of somewhere in the order of 300 to 400 feet, those are the sites that we don't see issues with. I think Starbucks is a really good example, right? Today, as I mentioned, when I drove by Dunkin' Donuts, they had queuing that was coming out into Route 1. When I drove by Starbucks, they also had a lot of queuing, but it was all internal because they have sort of a long drive aisle. It's a mixed use development. It's not one building, but a mixed use development in terms of there's the bank comes first. You sort of have to drive by that, and then you come to the Starbucks. So any sort of queuing is really that's about internal conflicts, which are less of a public safety concern, obviously, so that was one thought that I put in the memo around how do we potentially address that concern in the Higas Parkway, even if we do it in a limited location to the Payne Road. And it looked like, the 300 to 400 feet would work pretty well for the conceptual design of this project. But it also, like I said, that's what Starbucks has, seems to be what Wendy's has, which I don't think ever sort of spills out into Hannaford Drive as far as I know. Who else did I look at? The Dunkin' Donuts right there on Ginn Road as well. I've never heard issues with them queuing out to Ginn Road either. So,
Jay, I was the other person that needed a hard stop at 9:30. I have a
okay.
10 o'clock meeting I've got to get to. But my last comment was in regard to the Starbucks facility. The mistake that I feel that we made as a planning board at the time was where we allowed the signage for the ordering. I think that was a mistake personally, but I'm not on the planning board anymore, so I'll let them figure that out. But otherwise, I'm sorry that I have to leave you folks, but thank you for the opportunity to have my say this morning.
Thanks, Alan.
All righty.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Al.
everyone.
Thanks, Corey.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
It's 4. Good. We still have 4 committee members, so we do still have a quorum, but
I have to be done by 10, just so you'll know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'd be nice to be done well before. Yeah.
So I guess, I feel like we've reached some general consensus around, okay, let's limit the location in the Higas Parkway. And I think that starts to address the proliferation issue. Were there other areas, or do we think with that we've really largely addressed some of these? So I'm just going to go back through, sort of think about what these concerns were that we had heard. So proliferation was the one. Separation of businesses in the Higas Parkway. So again, I guess we should just talk about what if we do say 1,000 or 1,200 feet, whatever the case may be. I'm just trying to pull up a map from the intersection. That could allow for, again, we know we have a bunch of contract zones in the area. So really what we might be looking at is the potential of 2 drive-throughs in the Higas Parkway district based on current lot configuration. One could be at the lot that Andy's representing. Another one could be potentially along Payne Road, that lot that's just beyond the Acura dealership. Is that something that we feel is a over proliferation, or is it, now that they're on 2 different roadways, one on Payne, one on Higas, is that something different? I ask that as a question, not as a.
I think I'm okay with it. There's one right across the street too, at the Dunkin' Donuts right across the street. So it's its own little node right there,
Okay.
and it's car and vehicle intensive right there. So I'd be okay with it.
I'm okay with it.
All right.
I think the other concerns that I have again are this footprint are, there's a minimum footprint and it's mixed use, and I don't know if we have to define that, but
Yeah, I think
percentage wise or not.
Yeah, and I think, frankly, I think back to that other site I mentioned along Payne Road that has its site plan approval that had referenced, at least in the early concepts, having a drive-through or a restaurant. It was a very similar size to the building, at least as I remember it, and Jamel will correct me. I think, we can look back. It was very similar size to the type of building that Andy and his clients are looking at. And I think sort of with the same proportional sort of one sort of section being a restaurant with a number of other uses. So I think we could really probably take a look. If we think that this example that is there conceptually seems to make sense, I think we could probably take a look at those 2 examples and draw out a basic schematic footprint size and ratio, if that's sort of the way the long rangers feel the recommendation should go.
Good with me. I think there's a rendering of that on the corner of Haggis, not on their lot, but on the corner that advertises it as a future retail development.
Which one was that, Dave? I'm sorry. I guess
The,
I-
the lot behind the Acura of the contract zone, I think they have a sign on the
Oh.
Acura lot that's advertising for a future development opportunity. And it looks like it's a 3 or 4 bay retail building, probably similar to Andy's there.
Yep. So as a committee, do you generally feel like that's the right approach to mixed-use building, is to amp up that language a little bit more than what's in there right now that currently just says mixed use, but really do a mixed use of a building of X size and the drive-through restaurant component being a X percentage of said building? Is that,
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Don't want to make it too complex.
and just to tease that out a little bit more, what would the committee think the high-end threshold, if you will, of percentage of building use should be? I mean, you know, are we talking about high end of 50-50, or could the restaurant be 80-20 or 80-20 the other way? Just in turn, and I don't know that this, again, like I said, we can do a little bit more homework as to what what this concept shows and what the other concept has showed, but I just want to have a sense of where the committee, give me a scale or a range that we might be thinking about, if that makes sense.
Can I make a comment, Jay?
Yeah.
Our concern would be if it was made too small, because some of our potential clients would be, tenants would be drive-through with just a little teeny bit of sit down, but you might have a drive-through that wants a full restaurant and a little drive-through or a little pickup area. So for us, if you went smaller than 50-50, it might, I'm not saying it would, it might be an inconvenience to a certain client, a certain tenant, but I'm not sure. I wouldn't think we'd need anything more than 50%. And that's just a guess.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one because you bump up on both ends of it, but have problems. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was sort of thinking along the lines of, at least, a max of 50%. And we can, again, if we look at sort of what this concept is and what the other concept was, that may come down a little bit, but that was sort of where my mind was. And again, I haven't done the analysis, but just trying to get that from the hip feel from the committee before we dive in.
Yeah. I think
And
that
Karen,
deserves a
Karen,
little
you're
bit of
muted, just so
thought.
you know.
Yeah. Well, in Andy's case, there are 2 of them, so it's.
Well, David, I want to be clear. I see half being a restaurant, the other half being 2 or 3 other businesses. It might be small commercial, not drive-through. The whole drive-through isn't going to be for the whole building. It was going to be a bank, maybe on one end, restaurant on the other, and another type of business in the middle. And then a second floor with office space. So really multi-use.
Right. And Jay, the limitation is on total square footage, not footprint, right?
Sure.
Just checking,
Great idea, Karen.
just double checking.
Right, you're thinking a multi-story building, right?
Yeah.
I think that's,
I think it deserves a little bit of thought, though. Yeah.
Yep.
Unintended consequences here could be. Yeah.
right. So I guess, let's say we tease out Karen's example there. And let's say we go with 50-50. What would the committee think if someone came in and said, all right, my first floor is going to be the drive-through restaurant and drive-through, whatever the case may be. And then this whole second floor is where I'm going to have my other use, be it office, retail, whatever the case may be. Is that, so far we've really been looking sort of linear. Now let's think vertically. I just want to be sure we're all understanding the different sort of dimensional ways this could go, up or across. So, and I don't know if that matters.
It's in
to
the
folks or not.
ballpark.
Ballpark is okay.
Yeah.
Crystal ball.
So I'm sensing general comfortability around this 50% notion, at least as a starting point of
Starting point.
consideration and scale, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah.
Jay, what are the next steps with this?
Yep, so great question. So let's see, it's been to first reading, and it's been to planning board for a public hearing. So the sort of official next step would be to go to council for a public hearing. I think what we would probably want to do is have a conversation with council leadership if they
Yeah.
want to see this go back. If we make some amendment language coming out of this discussion, and this is something else we should talk about as a committee, but you know, I think it would really be a question to Paul and Don and council leadership if they would ask the planning board to conduct another public hearing before it comes back to council. But I guess the other question I'd have is, does this committee feel like there's enough for us to continue to the conversation at the committee level before a recommendation is made? Or are you comfortable sort of where we're gonna, you know, and conversation is not over yet, I understand, but I think that's the other piece I would want to hear from this committee. If we're comfortable saying, okay, so long as we're doing the, you know, 1,200 feet from the intersection, we're doing this as a mixed-use building with no more than a certain percentage of a certain size building, and we haven't talked about those details, so I guess that's a question to you all. Do you want to see those details, or are you comfortable with the sort of scale conversation that we've had to date piece? So.
And the reason I ask is I think the more you have hammered out before it goes back to council, the better,
Absolutely.
is
Yep.
my opinion, just so you'll know.
Agreed.
Okay.
And certainly before it went back to planning board for another public hearing, we would have that language hammered out. I think that's,
So maybe we could make it a quick item to just give it a cursory review and then move it on.
so.
And maybe ahead of that, you could send us what you're thinking. So if you can.
Mhm.
We could, yeah, as part of the, you know, as part of your package ahead of time or whenever, give us a heads up and then we could, you know, maybe move right through it.
So staff can work on some additional language based on our conversation, and we can share that and see where we go.
Okay, do we have any further discussion on it? Anything else open, Jay? Are you comfortable with the consensus that you've got?
I think I have a pretty good understanding of the committee's interests and how to address the concerns, at least what this committee's thoughts are. I mean, there's no, you know, it's always hard, right? There's never one right answer how to do it. So, but I think this committee's come up with a viable alternative, and we'll see how others feel about it.
Andy, have
Thank
any
you.
last
Thank you very
comment?
much.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
And Dave, just so you know, we do have one member of the public who's been attending. So I know you'll get to the public comment piece, but I just wanted to be sure. I just wasn't sure if you could see that list or not. I can't
I
remember.
I don't have them up, but I can bring it up. Yeah, so I'm just trying to look at our agenda. So that's it. If can we close item 2? I think so. And public comment. Allison again trying to get in here.
I don't see that she's raised her hand, so I'll keep my eye on that. And so while we wait on that, could I just, I do have one other item I wanted to just flag for the committee. And so her hand's still not up, so I think she may be okay for now. Just regards to, as you remember, we talked about comp plan, jumping into the public forums for the comp plan. We had talked about November 12th as well as the 17th and 19th. What we're going to do in talking with the town manager is defer the meeting of November 12th to the week after Thanksgiving. Council has a meeting on the 12th that is going to sort of supersede that. And in addition, start to get a little uncomfortable with the amount of public notice that we'd be able to get out in time. We have, for those that don't know, I think hopefully you all do know, the town has a new position. We have a communications coordinator who she's awesome. I started just working with her shortly, so she's really helping. She's going to help get things out into the leader, get it on Facebook, and really do a good job of helping us notify and coordinate our notification of the meeting. So still targeting the 17th and 19th of November, and then going to look for a date that week after Thanksgiving, which still gives this committee time to pull together the comments and make a final recommendation to council by the end of the calendar year, which is the stated goal. Should also note that council is, my understanding, going to have a council workshop to talk about comp plan comments as a group, because they've been, obviously everyone has their independent thoughts, but it's important for the council, I think, what the board chairs, committee chairs, council chairs' thoughts are, is that there be the collective thoughts of committee, of council. Of course, everyone is enabled and allowed and should have their own independent thoughts, but we want to be sure if we're reacting to either individual councilors or a council at the whole's direction. So
Just so you'll know, in case you missed it at the very beginning when we were chatting informally, I do believe that what's going to be happening with the council is pretty much we're staying the same, including Paul as chair and Dawn as vice chair. Committees are pretty much staying the same. At least that's my understanding as of this morning. So that'd be good. There'll be some continuity. But yeah, definitely, we need to make sure we're all on the same page with what's going on with the comp plan. So a workshop, I know, is something that they want to do. So.
I'm sorry, Jay, when are they thinking of doing that workshop?
November 18th. So squeezed right in between the two public forums. I think that's going to be one of those workshops right before their meeting. So I would imagine probably a 5:30, 6 o'clock start, something to that effect.
Those are the, yeah.
So
Awesome.
we have, our public forums, the committee's public
Okay.
forums are the
Our
17th
17th and the 19th,
and 19th.
and then the 18th
18th is going to be a council workshop. That's really going to be
Okay.
the council's show. That's going to be their own deliberation. Of course, it's a public meeting, but it's really their time to bring their thoughts collectively together, is my understanding of it anyway.
Jay, are we doing any of our workshops, so-called hybrid? Of course, it will depend on what the heck's going on with COVID at
Yeah,
that
this
point.
Jean Marie, I think so far we've been planning on all virtual, although Karen and I did talk about this, last week or whatever, and we did, now that we're able to get back to this hybrid meeting, and for those, when we say hybrid meeting, council's meeting in chambers for those that are willing to come or able, whatever the right word is. Some council members are in attendance, others are still home doing virtual. Some members of the public are able to come in, but my understanding is council chambers can only have up to 20 total people in it.
Right.
That's a total of 20. So if we have, for example, a council meeting that has 7 councilors and 2 or 3 staff, you've just used up half of the total capacity. So I'm trying to tease out what the benefit to having a hybrid meeting on this, but there may be some people who just aren't comfortable. So,
And there's I think it's a public perception thing.
Yeah.
Even if no one showed up, I think the fact that it was available for those who don't like Zoom, don't have access, whatever, may be helpful, but it may be a moot point if the COVID numbers keep going up. Who knows? They may be sending us all back home again. I hope
Yeah.
not, but you know.
Yeah, which
you
may-
need- But it's easy to go, you can say one of them is hybrid, like the one in December, for example,
Mhm.
pretend. And if it looks like that's not a safe or prudent way to go, then it's not. It's going to
Yeah.
be totally virtual. So
Could there be a
Just
sign up ahead of time? Could there be a sign up ahead of time, or is that too?
I would think we would have to do something
Yeah.
to that effect,
Yeah.
just because you'd hate to have, 30 people show up and have to say, well,
Right.
head on home.
oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, with the hybrid stuff, I think I'm one of these. I haven't gone into council meetings just because of my own family situation with COVID exposure, and I do believe that Tody does a sign up if you want to attend in person as a public person. That I think you have to sign up, but you may want to check with Tody. I doubt you're going to get 30 people wanting to come in, but you also, don't you want to have what do you do with the security on the Zoom? Because you want to make sure you don't get crashed.
Yeah, we do the
Crashed.
webinar. It's much like we do
Okay,
here.
all
Yep,
right.
yep.
okay.
Similar to this, where we can invite people in and we
Yeah.
can either just do the allowed to speak or bring them in as panelists. There's,
And we want
yep.
to do YouTube also.
Yeah, so
YouTube
this
streaming.
this is up streaming right now and
Yeah.
being recorded. So yep, we do all
Okay.
that good stuff, of course. Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And Jay, have we thought about what time we're doing the meetings on the 17th and 19th?
6 or 6:30. I'll have to look at what Allison
Okay.
we talked about, but hopefully 6.
And where do we, yeah.
Yeah, so I need to make the that's actually part of what I was going to work on today is making the web links today. But they'll be virtual meetings. So
They're both virtual meetings, 17th and 19th.
Yep.
They're all Zoom.
Zoomers. So-
Wonderful.
Yeah, and Jay, if we do have hybrid, we would probably ask committee members to join virtually to give more space for in-person.
I would think, or try to, just figure out 1 or 2 committee members who
Yeah.
might want to come in, something like that. Yeah, we'll
I would suggest having at least 1 or 2 people live there, obviously.
yeah,
Um,
I'm sort of thinking the same.
I won't be live. I can tell you that, but that's okay.
Alive, but not live.
That's right.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I'm going to turn into a pumpkin pretty soon.
Yeah, I've been watching the news coming across the phone. It's all good. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it is all very good.
Any last minute items, Jay? We,
All set.
all right, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.